Well, I'm guessing you probably know the first verse of the song America the Beautiful, but do you know the second verse? Well, welcome back to the Colorblind Architect Podcast. I'm your host, David, and today I'm going to talk again about this nightmare that we just keep going through. And what nightmare is that? That it seems that the Democrats have just wholly given themselves over to the ideology of Marx. And one of the problems with that is they're pushing critical race theory. And I know we've talked a lot about this. We've talked ad nauseum about this. So many people have talked about it. And fortunately, there are a lot of Americans who are standing up now. They're speaking out against it, which is great. And so what is wrong with critical race theory? Well, it's because it's the criticism of all things. See, Marxism, it is a false religion. I think that's a given at this point for anybody who's awake. But the problem with Marxism is it's based on the criticism of everything. Now, what does that mean? Because that doesn't necessarily sound bad. See, here's the secret. All good liars know that you need to incorporate a certain part of the truth. And Karl Marx, just like any good liar, knew that he had to incorporate some part of the truth. There were definitely problems in his day, just as there are still problems in this day, right? There are always problems with the world. There's always problems with society. So what's wrong with criticizing everything? Well, it's not that criticism of everything is necessarily bad. It's to what end? What is the end of that criticism? Now, as an architect, I had to go through architecture school, obviously. And in architecture school, there is a heavy emphasis on criticism. In fact, when you present your projects to your teachers, it's actually called a critique. Now, why is it called a critique? Well, because they criticize you. Now, before you start thinking, oh, well, that's so mean. Well, actually, in the case of an architecture school professor criticizing the work of a student, it is a constructive criticism. They are pointing out all the things that could be improved, right? This is actually a healthy thing to go through critique. And so one of the reasons why I don't necessarily like saying, hey, let's ban critical race theory, I prefer to say, let's make it clear that the emphasis in teaching should be towards teaching the positives and negatives, but ultimately the positives of our system. And why is that? Because we are a society that believes in positive change. As in, we can improve, we can make things better. Frederick Douglass talked about this when he talked about the founding documents laid the foundation for the abolishment of slavery and the freedom of the black race. And so the criticism of the Marxists right now is aimed at tearing down the Constitution, tearing down the Declaration of Independence as systematically racist, systematically oppressive. But they totally forget the fact that the theory that they're espousing, Marxism, is far more oppressive, far more similar to feudalism, which is a way worse system than anything in America. Like I said, there's many, many things wrong with America. I totally agree with that. However, as I mentioned in the intro, America the Beautiful. In the second verse, when it gets to the third line of that verse. It says, America, America, may God mend thine every flaw. Now, that song was written in the 1800s. Do you not think that maybe Americans have always been aware of our problems? The very Three-Fifths Compromise in the Constitution, which is often criticized by the left as being systematically racist, because it counted black people as 3/5 of a man. No, see, here's the problem. They get it wrong. The Three-Fifths Compromise was not counting black people as 3/5 of a man. It was counting slaves as 3/5 of a man. That's a key difference. A very critical key difference. Okay? See, a free black man, and there were many free black men back in the day of the Constitution. Okay? If I'm not mistaken, I think Massachusetts had already banned slavery by the time of the Revolution. So this idea that somehow slavery was nationwide, it was systematically oppressive. No, there was already the seeds of abolition. There was already the idea that all men are created equal. There were already people who believed that and were fighting for it. And they were fighting against people who wanted to maintain a system of oppression for their own profit and gain. So that's the key difference. The Three-Fifths Compromise was meant to dilute the power of the slave-holding states by not granting them as much power in Congress, because if you count a slave as 3/5, then there's not as much, representation allotted to them in the census for the congressional representative seats. In fact, the slaveholding states, they actually wanted to count slaves as 1 per person. The abolitionists, they wanted to count it as 0. The Three-Fifths Compromise was specifically because they wanted to dilute the power of the slaveholders so that they could eventually abolish slavery. But they had to have the southern states. They had to have those slaveholders as part of the revolution to be able to defeat the mightiest army in the world, that of Great Britain. So, true history is usually a little bit more complicated, and unfortunately, the criticism of all things is usually being done by idiots. Usually being done by Marxists. And by the way, Marxist essentially means you're an idiot, because if you believe that claptrap, you've got to be an idiot. So, America, America, may God mend thine every flaw. That should be our slogan. May God mend thine every flaw, because we are on a path of constant progression and improvement. We are trying to improve. But we need to recognize what our target goal is. And unfortunately, for the past 100 years, we've let the so-called progressives, the leftists, control that narrative of where we're going. And the problem there is their vision of where we're going is Karl Marx's, and I don't believe that is the vision of where we should be going. Instead, I believe we need to reevaluate what our mission statement is, reevaluate what our vision statement is. Where are we going as a nation? Where are we going as a society? What do we want to achieve? Do we really want to just have some racist German former Jew guy from Germany be deciding what our vision statement is? No, we don't. Stop listening to Karl Marx. Start listening to God. Start listening to your heart. And start thinking for yourself. And with that, I bid you adieu for another day. I'm the Colorblind Architect. Peace out.